life. I lived for her daily. She was my only girl.
Welcome to our true crime story. Today, we begin with a case that has shocked communities and stirred hearts, a case that investigators and citizens alike have described as one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing child murders ever recorded. This is the story of 5-year-old Kamarie Holland, a little girl whose life was filled with promise, laughter, and dreams of becoming a princess, only to have the future stolen in a single, devastating moment. Kamarie was a beacon of innocence. Her bright eyes and infectious smile lit up every room she entered. She played with the carefree joy that only a child can possess and dreamed of a magical life, where she would one day wear a sparkling crown and live in a castle. Yet, beneath the surface of these joyful dreams lay a tragedy waiting to unfold, a tragedy that would leave a deep scar on her family and the entire community. In this narrative, we are not merely recounting the sequence of events. We are exploring the profound contrast between love and neglect, hope and despair, and the responsibilities that society bears when it comes to protecting its most vulnerable members. On one side of this painful story is Kamarie Holland, Kamarie's devoted father, whose unwavering commitment and constant care provided his daughter with a safe haven, at least for a time. On the other side stands Christy Seipel, Kamarie's mother, whose troubled past and unstable behavior set in motion a series of events that ultimately led to unspeakable horror. This narrative is a journey into the heart of a family that, despite moments of love and tenderness, was undermined by warning signs too easily overlooked. It is a call to reflect on the what-ifs of our systems, a plea to consider what might have been different if early intervention had been the norm rather than the exception. What if every subtle sign of neglect had been heeded? What if the cries for help from a vulnerable child had been met with immediate, decisive action? As we begin, let us step gently into Kamarie's world, a world that once brimmed with hope, only to be marred by a series of failures that no child should ever have to endure. Her story is one of lost innocence, but it is also a stark reminder of our collective responsibility. Through this narrative, we aim not only to recount the events, but also to learn from them so that, in the future, no other child is left unprotected. Family background and early warning signs. Kamarie Holland was born into a family that, at first glance, appeared to offer warmth and security. In the early years of her life, there were moments of pure joy, a time when her laughter echoed through the home, and the world seemed filled with endless possibilities. However, as we delve deeper into the family dynamics, we discover that beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a series of warning signs that would later prove catastrophic. The love and dedication of Kamarie Holland. At the heart of Kamarie's early life was her father, Kamarie Holland. Kamarie was a man who dedicated himself wholly to the care and protection of his daughter. Every day, even before the first light of dawn, Kamarie would rise with a purpose to ensure that Kamarie began her day feeling cherished and secure. He would prepare her favorite breakfast, sit with her to read beloved stories, and spend endless hours playing and laughing with her. His presence was a constant source of comfort, a steadfast shield against the uncertainties of the world. Kamarie's devotion was evident in every aspect of their daily routine. He believed that love was the foundation upon which a child's future was built. His efforts were not only practical, ensuring that Kamarie was fed, clothed, and educated, but also emotional, nurturing her spirit and encouraging her to dream. In his eyes, every smile from his daughter was a victory against the hardships of life. For Kamarie, there was nothing more important than protecting the light in his daughter's eyes. Christy Seipel's troubled past and unsettled present. In stark contrast to Kamarie's steadfast care was the troubled life of Kamarie's mother, Christy Seipel. Christy's life had been marred by years of instability, a history of substance abuse, emotional turmoil, and erratic behavior had left deep scars that she struggled to overcome. While there were moments when Christy attempted to embrace her role as a mother, these instances were often overshadowed by her inability to provide consistent care. Friends and neighbors, those who observed the family from the outside, began to notice subtle yet concerning signs. Christie was known to have sudden mood swings episodes, where anger or despair would overtake her without warning. There were times when she would miss scheduled appointments or be noticeably absent when Kamarie needed her most. In the quiet moments of the day, when the bustle of family life should have been a source of comfort, an undercurrent of tension and unpredictability lingered. These red flags, although minor when considered in isolation, were part of a larger pattern of behavior. For those who knew Christie, there was an unspoken understanding that she was battling demons from her past demons that sometimes spilled over into her ability to care for her child. Unfortunately, these early warning signs were not given the attention they warranted. Rather than prompting a swift intervention, they were dismissed as the challenges of a troubled individual trying to navigate a difficult life. A family at the crossroads. The dynamic within the Holland household was defined by a stark contrast: the consistent, loving care provided by Corey and the unpredictable, often harmful behavior exhibited by Christie. This imbalance created an environment in which Kamarie, despite the love she received from her father, was exposed to risks that no child should ever face. Corey's efforts to create a stable, nurturing environment were heroic in many ways. His commitment was unwavering, and his actions spoke of a deep, all-consuming love for his daughter. Yet, even the strongest foundation can be undermined by cracks that go unnoticed. The sporadic moments of neglect and the inconsistent care resulting from Christie's struggles introduce vulnerabilities into Kamarie's life, vulnerabilities that, in hindsight, appear painfully obvious. Imagine, for a moment, the possibility that every small signal of distress had been recognized and acted upon. What if a concerned neighbor had taken the initiative to report the irregularities they observed? What if social services had been more proactive in supporting Christie through her personal challenges? These what-if scenarios are not meant to cast blame on any one person. Rather, they serve as a reminder that early intervention could be the difference between a life nurtured and a life tragically lost. In the early days of Kamarie's life, every giggle and every smile was a promise that her future would be as bright as the love that surrounded her. Yet, the subtle signs of instability that crept into her daily existence were harbingers of a much darker reality. The very elements that should have been the community's safety net were frayed and worn, unable to catch a child in need. As we reflect on these early warning signs, we are reminded of the vital importance of vigilance. The story of Kamarie Holland is not only a record of sorrow, it is also a lesson in the necessity of listening to those faint signals before they grow into deafening cries for help. The failure to act upon these early indications is a somber reminder that our systems must be improved to protect every vulnerable life. In this first part of our narrative, we have laid the foundation by exploring the origins of Kamarie's life and the complex dynamics that defined her early years. Corey's unwavering love stands in stark contrast to the chaos that Christie's troubled past introduced into the household. Together, these forces created a fragile balance, one that ultimately could not withstand the pressures that would lead to the unthinkable. On the evening of December 12, 2021, what was meant to be a routine custody exchange turned into the beginning of an unspeakable nightmare. Christie Seipel took 5-year-old Kamarie Holland for a brief visit that, in the innocent eyes of a child, promised warmth and a moment of connection with her mother. For Kamarie, the prospect of spending time with her mom was an exciting deviation from her everyday life with her devoted father, Kamarie Holland. As the night progressed, the atmosphere grew unusually quiet. In homes where children typically laugh and play, a heavy silence began to settle in. While nothing outwardly alarming was observed at that moment, a subtle sense of foreboding was in the air, a quiet hint that something was terribly amiss. When the first light of dawn broke on December 13th, Christie awoke to a scene that would forever haunt her memory. Stepping into the living room, she found the front door wide open and the familiar sounds of her home replaced by an eerie silence. In that instant, the The comforting routine was shattered. Kamarie was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as Christy frantically searched every room. She called out her daughter's name, her voice trembling with rising terror. Yet, there was no response. The realization that her little girl had vanished in the night sent shockwaves through her mind. Within minutes, the phone rang for Kamarie Holland. The call delivered news too heavy to bear, a news that would alter their lives forever. Kamarie, who had always prided himself on being there for his daughter, now faced the unthinkable. His precious Kamarie was missing. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and disbelief as he rushed to the scene. Emergency services were immediately alerted, and police officers, along with community volunteers, began a desperate search. Every available resource was mobilized as neighbors joined the effort, combing the streets and alleys for any sign of the missing child. Hours passed in a haze of frantic calls, tearful explanations, and mounting dread. Despite the extensive search, hope slowly gave way to despair. As the day wore on, the community braced itself for the worst. Then came the devastating moment. Investigators discovered Kamarie's lifeless body in an abandoned house located on the outskirts of Phoenix City, Alabama. The discovery was nothing short of heartbreaking. In a dilapidated, neglected building that had long stood as a symbol of urban decay, the small body of Kamarie was found. Forensic teams later confirmed that her body bore unmistakable signs of severe trauma, evidence of a struggle and abuse that no child should ever endure. The sight of the abandoned house, its walls echoing with silence and neglect, was a stark reminder of how far a life so full of potential had fallen. For those present at the scene, the image of Kamarie still formed. Her face frozen in a final expression of innocence lost, was a vision of unbearable sorrow. The discovery not only confirmed the worst fears of her family, but also sent shockwaves throughout the community and across the nation. In that moment, the small life of Kamarie Holland became a symbol of profound injustice and a rallying cry for accountability. Following the grim discovery, law enforcement mobilized with a sense of urgency and determination. Investigators from multiple agencies converged on the scene, determined to piece together the events that led to such an unspeakable loss. Within hours of the discovery, forensic teams secured the area. Every detail was meticulously recorded: the placement of objects, the condition of the building, and even the faint traces of biological evidence. Surveillance cameras in the vicinity were quickly reviewed, and investigators began to compile a timeline of events. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was vital in reconstructing the fateful night. Interviews with neighbors and witnesses yielded fragments of information that slowly began to form a coherent picture. Several residents recalled seeing a woman hurriedly leaving the area in the early hours of the morning, while others mentioned noticing unusual activity around the abandoned building on the night of December 12th. These accounts, though initially vague, gained significance as investigators cross-referenced them with digital records and surveillance footage. A major breakthrough came when authorities identified a troubling connection. Christy Seipel, Kamarie's mother, was found to have a relationship with a man named Jeremy Tremaine Williams. Williams was no stranger to law enforcement. His records showed a history of violent behavior and disturbing allegations of abuse. Shockingly, it was discovered that he had once lived in the very house where Kamarie's body was later found. Further investigation into financial records added another layer to the unfolding mystery. On the night preceding Kamarie's disappearance, a transaction of $2,500 was recorded. This sum, tied directly to Christy Seipel, raised immediate red flags. Digital communications, including text messages and phone call logs, revealed that Christy had engaged in a series of exchanges that pointed to a deliberate and calculated decision to expose her daughter to harm. As investigators gathered more data, video evidence emerged from nearby security cameras. Though the footage was not crystal clear, Careful analysis by experts confirmed that it captured moments of contact between Christy Seipel and Jeremy Williams on that fateful night. The images, though fleeting, painted a disturbing picture of intimacy and collusion that could not be ignored. Each piece of evidence, from the financial transaction to the surveillance footage, reinforced the growing realization that Kamarie's disappearance was no accident. It was the result of a series of deliberate choices, decisions made by adults entrusted with her care. These revelations not only intensified the sense of betrayal, but also highlighted the failure of a system that was supposed to protect the vulnerable. In the days following the discovery, investigators worked tirelessly, following every lead and examining every detail. They reconstructed a timeline that pointed to a chilling chain of events. Christy Seipel, battling her own demons, had engaged with Jeremy Williams in a manner that ultimately led to the exploitation and abuse of her daughter. What began as a seemingly innocuous visit had escalated into a calculated act of betrayal that culminated in the loss of a life filled with promise. The investigation also prompted difficult questions for those involved. How had these early warning signs gone unheeded? Why had the signals of neglect been dismissed rather than investigated? These questions resonated deeply with law enforcement and the community alike, serving as a painful reminder of the systemic failures that allowed such a tragedy to occur. As the investigation unfolded, the narrative became clearer, though no less tragic. The evidence pointed inexorably toward a disturbing reality. A vulnerable child had been caught in the crossfire of adult failings both personal and institutional. Every detail added to the growing urgency to not only hold those responsible accountable, but also to address the shortcomings of a system that should have safeguarded her. In these early stages of the investigation, a profound sense of injustice permeated every conversation. The loss of Kamarie Holland was not simply a tragic event to be documented. It was a call to reevaluate how society listens to and acts upon the subtle cries for help that often go unheard. It was a moment that underscored the need for change, a need that would continue to shape the unfolding story in the days and weeks to come. The investigation had uncovered a trail of evidence that pointed to a deliberate and calculated betrayal of trust. With all the damning details in hand, law enforcement moved to bring the culprits to justice. The case soon transitioned from the dark corridors of a forensic investigation to the solemn halls of a courtroom, where the full extent of the crime would be laid bare. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with grief and anticipation. Families, community members, and journalists gathered to witness the proceedings, all seeking answers for the unspeakable loss of young Kamarie Holland. The trial of Jeremy Tremaine Williams, the man accused of inflicting the brutal violence that ended Kamarie's life, became the center of this public reckoning. Williams was charged with capital murder, rape, and multiple counts of child abuse. From the moment he entered the courtroom, his presence evoked a mix of revulsion and sorrow. Prosecutors presented a wealth of evidence, photographs of the crime scene, forensic reports detailing the severe trauma inflicted upon the child, and video recordings that captured his chilling actions. Each piece of evidence painted a vivid picture of a premeditated act of cruelty that defied the bounds of human decency. Witness after witness took the stand. Forensic experts described in painstaking detail the physical injuries that Kamarie had suffered, explaining how the patterns of trauma left no doubt of a violent struggle. Child welfare professionals recounted the missed opportunities, where early intervention might have made a difference, and family members, with voices trembling with both heartbreak and determination, shared their personal memories of Kamarie, a vibrant, joyful child whose laughter had once filled their lives. One of the most harrowing moments came when a forensic expert, his voice measured yet filled with quiet sorrow, detailed how the injuries sustained by Kamarie were consistent with a prolonged and merciless attack. The expert's testimony was a stark, undeniable reminder that this was no accident, but a deliberate act of exploitation and abuse. Throughout the trial, The prosecution built its case by linking Williams not only to the crime scene, but also to a disturbing pattern of behavior. His past criminal record, marked by episodes of violence and abuse, was presented to show that his actions were part of a broader pattern of depravity. The digital evidence records of transactions, text messages, and surveillance footage further cemented the narrative that Williams had been involved in a calculated scheme that endangered a vulnerable child. As the evidence mounted, the defense struggled to present any alternative explanation. Their arguments, at times, attempted to shift focus to technicalities or to question the reliability of certain pieces of evidence. However, the overwhelming consistency in the testimonies and the clarity of the forensic findings left little room for doubt. The jury, after several days of intense deliberation, returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts, in a decision that resonated with the collective outcry of a community in mourning. The judge imposed for death sentences on Jeremy Tremaine Williams. The sentence was not only a measure of retribution, but a clear statement that such heinous crimes would meet with the severest of penalties. The courtroom, filled with a mix of relief and lingering sorrow, stood as a testament to a society's demand for justice in the face of unthinkable cruelty. Parallel to Williams' trial, another legal proceeding unfolded against Christy Seipel, Kamarie's mother. The evidence against Christy was equally damning. Investigators had shown that her actions, the decision to expose her daughter to Williams in exchange for money, had directly contributed to the chain of events leading to Kamarie's untimely death. In her trial, Christy faced charges of human sex trafficking and was confronted with testimonies and evidence that left little doubt about her complicity. Ultimately, Christy Seipel pleaded guilty to these charges and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Although many in the community felt that this sentence did not fully capture the enormity of her betrayal, it was a clear acknowledgement that those who endanger a child's life must be held accountable. The trials, while legally conclusive, left deep emotional scars. In the quiet moments following the verdict, Kamarie Holland and Kamarie's other family members were seen weeping softly, their pain shared by everyone present. The loss of Kamarie had become a symbol of a system that had failed a vulnerable child, a reminder that justice, while served in the courtroom, came too late to restore a shattered life. Beyond the courtroom, the community's reaction was immediate and heartfelt. In the days after the verdicts, public vigils were held. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers gathered in silent protest, holding candles and sharing memories of Kamarie's laughter and light. Social media channels lit up with tributes and calls for reform, as people across the nation demanded that lessons be learned from this unspeakable tragedy. Many community members asked, in hushed yet determined voices, what if we had acted sooner? What if every warning sign had been heeded? These what-if questions, posed not in anger, but in sorrow and resolve, underscored the urgent need for systemic change. They were a reminder that every subtle cry for help should be met with immediate, decisive action, a standard that, if met, could prevent such tragedies from ever occurring again. In small community meetings and local town halls, citizens discussed ways to improve the safety net for children. Suggestions range from increasing funding for social services and mental health programs, to establishing better communication channels among teachers, healthcare providers, and social workers. There was a shared sense that the loss of Kamarie must not be in vain, that her memory could drive meaningful reform and, ultimately, save lives. The trial of Jeremy Williams and the subsequent legal proceedings against Christy Seipel brought a measure of justice, but they also left lingering questions about how such a tragedy could occur in the first place. In the aftermath, investigators, activists, and community leaders called for a comprehensive review of child protection policies. They urged that early warning signs in homes, however subtle, be taken seriously and acted upon without delay. From my perspective, this case is not merely about retribution. It is about transforming our collective grief into action. The tragedy of Kamarie Holland exposes a stark truth. Our systems must be robust enough to catch even the faintest signs of neglect and abuse. We must ask ourselves how we can better support families in crisis and ensure that every child is given the protection they deserve. Imagine a future where every concerned citizen is empowered to report signs of neglect without hesitation, where professionals are equipped with the tools and training to intervene early, and where our institutions work in unison to shield vulnerable lives. What if, instead of questioning after the fact, we built a proactive network of care that ensures no child is ever left to suffer as Kamarie did? The courtroom may have delivered its verdict, but the work of healing and reform is only beginning. As we continue to grapple with the fallout of this case, let it serve as a catalyst for change, a call to build a system that values every life and acts swiftly to prevent future tragedies. In the next section, we will explore in greater detail how Kamarie's loss has resonated with her family and the community, and how these reactions are fueling a broader movement for reform. The questions we ask today and the actions we take tomorrow will determine whether the memory of Kamarie Holland becomes a beacon for hope and change, or a reminder of a system that once failed the most vulnerable. Long-term impact and the call for change. In the weeks, months, and years following the trial, the ripple effects of Kamarie Holland's tragic loss continued to shape the lives of those who knew her and to stir deep reflection within the broader community. The courtroom verdict, while delivering a measure of justice, could not erase the profound, lasting impact that this loss had inflicted on a family and on an entire community. Determined to see reform, family grief that endures. For Kamarie Holland, the absence of his daughter remains an ever-present wound. Every day, he is reminded of Kamarie in the smallest moments, a stray giggle that recalls her laughter, a ray of sunshine that seems to echo her smile. Kamarie's grief is not just personal. It is the grief of a parent who has had to carry the weight of unanswered what-if questions. In quiet moments, he often reflects, what if I had noticed the signs sooner? What if the support we needed had been there when it mattered most? These questions, painful as they are, fuel his resolve to honor Kamarie's memory by advocating for a system that can better protect children like her. Kamarie's older siblings, too, bear the heavy burden of loss. Their daily lives have been indelibly marked by the void left by their sister's absence. Family gatherings, once filled with playful banter and shared stories, now carry a quiet sadness, a reminder of a laughter that can never be restored. In their shared sorrow, they also find strength. They have become outspoken advocates for child safety. Their voice is a testament to the deep love they had for Kamarie and their determination to ensure that no other family endures such heartache. Community response and the call for systemic reform. Beyond the walls of the Holland home, the community's reaction was both immediate and sustained. In the wake of Kamarie's death, local vigils were held, bringing together neighbors, friends, and strangers in a collective expression of mourning and resolve. Candles flickered in the night as people gathered in parks and community centers, each light a symbol of hope and a tribute to a life cut tragically short. Social media platforms became a space for public grief and fervent calls for change. Posts and messages poured in from every corner of the nation, urging policymakers and social service agencies to examine and reform a system that had, in many ways, failed Kamarie. The outpouring of support was matched by a growing chorus of voices demanding accountability and immediate action. Community meetings and town halls were organized, where citizens discuss ways to bolster child protection services, to train professionals in recognizing subtle signs of neglect, and to ensure that every tip or concern was met with prompt intervention. In these forums, citizens asked in thoughtful, measured tones, what if every subtle warning sign had been taken seriously? What if our systems were designed not only to react after a tragedy occurs, but to prevent one altogether? These questions, though born of sorrow, carried the potential to spark meaningful reform. They underscored a collective realization that protecting children is a responsibility shared by all families, communities, and government alike. Lessons learned and constructive reflections. Kamarie's case has forced a critical examination of how we identify and respond to early signs of family distress. There is now a widespread acknowledgement that the subtle indicators of neglect and instability should trigger immediate support, not punitive measures, but compassionate intervention. The lessons learned from Kamarie's story are both painful and necessary. They remind us that no warning, however small, should ever be ignored when it comes to protecting a child. In my view, the tragedy of Kamarie Holland is a clarion call to reimagine and rebuild our child protection systems. We must invest in robust early intervention programs that can identify at-risk families and provide them with the support they need before a crisis escalates. Improve training for social workers, teachers, and healthcare providers is essential so that even the quietest cry for help is recognized and addressed. It is imperative that we develop stronger communication channels among all parties involved in a child's welfare, ensuring that no red flag goes unnoticed. Imagine a future where every community member feels empowered to speak up when something is amiss, where a single observation can trigger a coordinated response that saves a life. What if the what-if questions of today became the proactive steps of tomorrow? What if every child could grow up in an environment where safety and love were guaranteed, rather than an uncertain patchwork of care? The answer lies in a collective commitment to change. Policymakers must prioritize funding for child protection services and mental health support. Schools and community organizations should work in tandem to create a network that supports families in distress, ensuring that no child is left vulnerable. By transforming our approach from reactive to proactive, we can prevent the kind of systemic failures that allowed Kamarie's tragedy to occur. A personal call to action. From my perspective, the enduring legacy of Kamarie Holland must be one of transformation. Her story is not just about a life lost, but about the urgent need to re-examine our responsibilities as a society. Every what-if that haunts us today should fuel a commitment to change, a commitment to ensure that no other family is forced to endure such sorrow. I urge every individual, parents, teachers, community leaders, and policymakers to reflect on the lessons of this case. Listen carefully to the faint signals of distress that may otherwise be overlooked. Advocate for reforms that strengthen our child protection systems. And most importantly, work together to build a future where every child is safe, where every cry for help is heard and acted upon immediately. The grief of a community can be a powerful catalyst for change if it is channeled into constructive action. Let Kamarie's memory be a guiding light that inspires us to create a safer, more compassionate society. By transforming our collective mourning into determined, unified action, we can honor her legacy and prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future, looking toward a brighter tomorrow. In conclusion, the long-term impact of Kamarie Holland's loss extends far beyond the sorrow of a single family. It has become a symbol of systemic failure, a stark reminder that the protection of our most vulnerable is a task that falls on all of us. As we move forward, let us remember the lessons learned from this tragedy. Let us ask ourselves, how can we ensure that no child is ever left unprotected? What systems must we put in place to guarantee that every subtle sign of neglect triggers a swift, compassionate response? These questions are not merely theoretical, they are the foundation upon which we must build a renewed commitment to child welfare. The future we envision is one where every community is vigilant, every professional is prepared, and every child is given the opportunity to live in an environment filled with love and safety. Concrete steps for change, a call to action. In the wake of the tragedy of Kamarie Holland, it is clear that the system designed to protect vulnerable children must undergo profound reform. This final section is not merely a reflection on what has been lost, it is a call to action. For every community member, every policymaker, and every professional involved in child welfare, We must now translate our grief into meaningful change and ensure that no other child suffers the fate that befell Kamarie. Reforming child protection systems. The evidence in Kamarie's case revealed a series of missed signals, subtle signs of neglect, an instability that, if addressed, might have prevented her tragic end. Our child protection systems must be restructured so that every warning, however faint, is immediately investigated. This calls for enhanced early intervention programs. Communities need robust systems that identify at-risk families long before a crisis unfolds. Investing in early intervention means training social workers to recognize even minor signs of distress and providing them with the resources to act decisively. Improve training and support for professionals, teachers, healthcare providers, and childcare workers are often the first to notice changes in a child's behavior. Comprehensive training programs must be developed so these professionals can confidently report concerns. Regular workshops and ongoing education should be mandated to ensure they stay up to date on the latest best practices in child protection. Stronger mandatory reporting laws. It is essential that laws require all individuals in positions of trust to report any signs of abuse or neglect. Strengthening these laws and ensuring they are rigorously enforced can help create a safety net that catches problems before they escalate. Collaboration and community engagement. Effective child protection does not rest solely on the shoulders of government agencies. A community that is informed, vigilant, and proactive plays a critical role in preventing tragedies like Kamarie's. To build such a network, we need interagency communication, establishing clear, direct lines of communication between schools, healthcare providers, law enforcement, and social services is crucial. When a potential case of neglect or abuse is identified, a coordinated response can mobilize quickly to intervene. Community awareness campaigns. Education is the first line of defense. Communities must be educated on the signs of neglect and abuse. Public workshops, media campaigns, and school programs can empower citizens to act. Imagine a neighborhood where every resident is aware and ready to step in when something seems off. What if each subtle warning was met with immediate support? Support networks for at-risk families. Many families face difficulties due to mental health issues, substance abuse, or economic hardship. By offering accessible counseling services, financial support, and community mentoring programs, we can address these underlying issues before they lead to neglect. A proactive support network can turn what-if scenarios into successful interventions that save lives. Learning from past failures. Reflecting on Kamarie's case, we must ask ourselves, what if every minor sign of distress had been treated as a red flag? What if our systems were designed to prevent a tragedy rather than respond only after it happens? These what-if questions are not meant to cast blame, they are a roadmap for the future. We have the opportunity to learn from these failures and build a system that leaves no child unprotected. Experts in child welfare agree that a shift from reactive to proactive measures is essential. This means reallocating resources to prevention rather than solely focusing on punishment after the fact. By prioritizing early intervention, we create an environment where potential threats are nipped in the bud. Practical recommendations for reform. Based on the lessons learned from this tragedy, here are some concrete steps that communities and policymakers should consider. Increase funding for child protection services. Allocate more resources to social services so that they can hire additional professionals, reduce caseloads, and ensure timely intervention. Implement mandatory ongoing training. Require continuous education for all professionals involved in child welfare, including regular updates on best practices and emerging trends in abuse prevention. Establish rapid response teams. Create specialized teams within law enforcement and social services that can be dispatched immediately when there is a report of potential neglect or abuse. These teams should work collaboratively to assess risk and provide necessary support. Enhance data sharing and monitoring. Develop secure, integrated systems that allow for real-time sharing of information among schools, hospitals, and social services. Early detection systems based on data analytics could flag unusual patterns, prompting swift intervention. Engage community stakeholders, foster partnerships between local governments, nonprofit organizations, and community groups to create a united front in child protection. Community centers can serve as hubs for education, support, and reporting mechanisms. A vision for the future. Imagine a future where every concerned citizen feels empowered to act on the smallest sign of distress. What if, instead of waiting for a tragedy to occur, we created a culture of proactive care? What if every what if was transformed into a promise fulfilled? A promise that every child would be protected, cherished, and given the chance to thrive. This vision is achievable only through collective responsibility. It requires the commitment of every community member, from the smallest local group to national policymakers. By channeling our grief into action, we can honor Kamarie's memory not as a symbol of failure, but as a catalyst for lasting change, a personal call to action. From my perspective, the legacy of Kamarie Holland should be a beacon that guides us toward a safer, more compassionate society. Her story is a tragic reminder of the high cost of inaction. I urge every individual, every parent, and every community leader to commit to vigilance and proactive support for at-risk families. Listen closely to the subtle cries for help. Do not let them go unanswered. The steps we take today can transform our future. Let us be the generation that turns sorrow into strength, that transforms what if into we did it. By working together, we can build a world where every child grows up in a safe, nurturing environment where the promise of a bright future is not just a dream, but a reality for all. Conclusion. The tragedy of Kamarie Holland has left an indelible mark on our hearts and on our society. It is a story of lost innocence, an unfulfilled potential, a stark reminder that the safety of our children depends on our willingness to act decisively at the first sign of trouble. As we look toward the future, let us remember the lessons of this case. Let us commit to reforming our systems, supporting our families, and building communities where every cry for help is met with immediate action. Thank you for joining me in this journey. May Kamarie's memory inspire us to protect every child with the urgency and compassion they deserve, ensuring that her tragic fate is never repeated.